It's time for another podcast by George. Straight talk, straight from the heartland, that'll have you saying, "By George, I think he's got it." Now, here's George.
Hello, hi, how are you? And welcome back to another podcast by George. I hope you enjoyed the podcast that we just had up. It's a favorite of mine because it's, what we call boots on the ground anyway. It's activism. We did an anti-war protest, and it was just a great experience. I would encourage anybody, if you ever have an opportunity to participate in that, carry a sign and be with a bunch of like-minded folks out on the street for a cause that you believe in, do it. I mean, it's a great thing. It's kind of a cross between a rock concert and a family reunion or something. I mean, it's really a great experience. That's the last podcast, and it dovetails very nicely into the podcast that we're going to do today. And I wanted to start this off by kind of explaining to everybody else, actually, what a hero is to me. And a hero to me in my lifetime, I started off as a kid with sports heroes, obviously, and first and foremost in my life was Muhammad Ali. I mean, I just love Ali to this day. God rest his soul. I mean, a great sports figure. I think he was involved in the greatest upset in sports history when he defeated Foreman and Zaire in that fight. And he was a great humanitarian. I mean, I just love Muhammad Ali. So there's your sports hero. And, the other hero that you'll hear me talk about a lot of time is on the journalism side. And it has a lot to do with Walter Cronkite going back to the 60s and 70s and calling out the United States on that Vietnam War and help us put an end to that type of thing. And that also dovetails with the protesters of the era. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm a guy that likes military folks, and I have military heroes. Jerry Berry, you just heard him on the podcast not too long ago. He's that guy that was the pilot of the last chopper out in Vietnam. He was at the controls taking people off the rooftop in the embassy in Saigon when we got out of that war. And Jerry Berry's a war hero. So I have those heroes also. And they're, heroes of wartime are uplifted and people talk about it all the time. But also just as equally important are the activists that help bring these wars to an end. And there were a lot of them back in the Vietnam War. A lot of them were musicians and celebrities also played a role in that. But we've got them amongst us right now. I mean, they're with us. They're out there. They're doing the work. And that's who I wanted to bring on the podcast today. It's a modern day hero of mine, and it's Bonnie Brown. She's going to join us here on Podcast by George. I'm just tickled to death. Bonnie's 29 years old. She was 29 anyway. Bonnie, did you turn 30 yet?
No, I'm still 29.
Oh, my God. Here's a woman that is not even 30 years old, folks, and she's already been to the Mexico border down there looking at that immigration crisis. She was in Charlottesville. She's been on the streets protesting this maniacal war buildup that's going on. I mean, she walks it like she talks it, and I just love that. Bonnie, tell the folks how you became an activist. When did you first start this?
Yeah, so I've actually been an activist for the last 15 years. So when I was 14 years old,
wow.
The summer before I became a freshman in high school, it was the 2004 election, and I had seen Kerry and Edwards, who were running as president and vice president at the time. And I seen them talking about issues like poverty and about education. And with me, heading into high school, I started thinking about college and started thinking about, how great it would be to be able to go to college, and have that opportunity without, putting myself into debt, and also for other students who are going into college and who were studying or who have already graduated and were buried in debt. So when I saw them talking about those issues, another activist kind of took me under her wing and taught me a lot about politics. And I started campaigning for Kerry and Edwards, doing door knocking for them and going to central committee meetings every month. And then 2 years later, when we had the midterms in '06, they sent me to the state convention and the district convention as a youth delegate. So that was kind of like my first time getting involved and meeting other youth delegates and really connecting with other political figures and activists. So, yeah.
Well, that's kind of your baptism. As I mentioned, you've been in the fire. I mean, you've been to Mexico. You've been down there and you've seen that. Tell us what you saw.
Yeah, so I was in Mexico about a year ago, a little over a year ago. When I seen the migrant caravan coming up, I really wanted to go down to Tijuana, kind of introduce myself to them and, just get their stories of what life was like in Honduras and in El Salvador and in Guatemala, and make sure that I was there to provide necessities of what they needed and to really get their stories back to United States citizens. So I called up another one of my friends down in Tennessee who was with me on the front lines in Charlottesville. And I was like, hey, I want to go to San Diego. I want to greet the migrant caravan. And she was like, yeah, I'm down. Let's go. So we met up in San Diego, stayed down there for about 2 weeks. I have another friend in San Diego who is the head of an organization called Bridge of Love Across the Border. And so she had tons of donations donated to her organization. So my friend and I would pack up my SUV with a lot of donated items and take them directly into the camps and make sure that they were hand delivered directly to the migrants. So, just going down there, talking with them, getting their stories, talking about what their journey was like, that was just amazing. And to be able to interview them and get their stories back to the.
Now, you just can't walk into one of these detention facilities. I know our elected representatives even have a hard time getting access to it. How close were you able to get? Did you actually, what kind of access did you have?
So it wasn't in San Diego. It was across the border, where a lot of them were waiting for their asylum applications to be processed or meeting with attorneys who would go into the camps to help them with their applications for asylum. And what a lot of people don't understand is that seeking asylum is completely legal. So they were coming to the United States and following all legal measures that they needed to in order to get into the U.S. And a lot of people just didn't understand that. A lot of people viewed them as coming to the border and just storming it, and viewed them as criminals, which just wasn't the case.
And backing up even a little bit further, Charlottesville. What was that? What was that like?
Wow, it was really something. I wasn't expecting it to turn out as violent as it did. There was one woman who was killed, obviously, 36 injured. I got there a couple days before the 12th. The night of the 11th, Dr. Cornel West came and he was giving a speech inside of the church, and there was well over 1,000 of us inside the church. And what happened was the Klan was doing their I'm sure you probably saw images. It was their torchlight march. Mm. And so they first came to the church, and the church that we were in was across the street from the University of Virginia. And they came to the church and they surrounded the church. They trapped us inside. We were on lockdown, and one activist who stepped outside asked them what they were doing there, and she got pepper sprayed by the Klan. And we had fears that they might try to burn the church down. So we were locked inside. We called the police for help. The police did not arrive. And in fact, they did not even arrive until they had left the church, went across the street to UVA, where students came out to protest, and burned a professor on his face. And they were, swinging their bats and harassing them verbally, and really caused a lot of harm to them. And then that's when the police arrived to kind of break up the situation and told them to go home, but nobody was arrested that night.
My God, I'd have been scared to death because, you think of a church as a sanctuary, but it's not. I mean, the Klan dynamited that church in the 60s and killed those little girls, and that nut walked into a church not that long ago and just shot everybody in it, basically. So, I mean, God, you're a brave soul, Bonnie, let me tell you. Good on you. Yeah. So now that's Charlottesville, and of course, you're based right here in the heartland, and you're participating in activism all the time. Where have you been lately, and what are you doing now?
Yeah, so I just continue to kind of show up at events that highlight what is going on in this country. And, I'm very much about protesting and civil disobedience if necessary to kind of bring attention and to kind of disrupt daily lives, that it's just to show people that life is not all about 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, having weekends off and, kind of being shut out of knowing what's happening. So, just being out there and holding up your signs and shouting and blocking traffic and just letting people know that, hey, this is what's going on and we kind of need to wake up.
Oh, we kind of need to wake up. We need it. And, being somebody that's old enough myself to remember the 60s and the early part of the 70s, this stuff works, folks. I mean, it has great power. We'd have been in Vietnam, I don't know how much longer if it hadn't been for that. And we've got these endless wars that are still going on. That situation in Afghanistan couldn't be more visible right now. A 20-year war. We've got 2,500 American boys and girls in the ground, another 5,000 or 6,000. More than that, I think. I think it's upwards around 20,000 wounded. And, that's medically wounded. We're not talking about the damage that's done to others for the rest of their life. And that's just Afghanistan. Now we've got this war looming large with Iran. And my God, let's hope that doesn't take place, because all these wars are completely non-productive. They don't help anybody. They kill us. They kill them. And nobody is the beneficiary. So I just can't commend Bonnie Moore for the type of thing that she's doing out on the streets. I mean, I do a little bit of it. I'd like to do more of it. And it's just necessary. We've got to do it. And that kind of brings me to one of my closing questions here. Now, you're involved in the Democratic Party, as you mentioned. And I saw just recently, didn't you endorse or come out in support of Elizabeth Warren? Okay, that's what I thought. Now, here's the question. Now, I'm more, people that watch my podcast regularly know that I'm a Tulsi Gabbard supporter and a Bernie supporter, and I like Elizabeth too. The one thing that Bernie makes clear is that if he is elected, that ain't going to do it, folks. I mean, particularly if they don't get the Senate. If they were to get the Senate, it would be an easier road. But if Congress stays split the way that it is, the executive branch maybe can do things in the area of foreign policy, perhaps, because even Trump is doing that. But these domestic programs that Bernie's supporting, as an example, that he wants to get action on, is going to take people like Bonnie and maybe Podcast by George in the street. I mean, we've got to, it's a call to action, because the people have got to force this change. Now, would you feel that would be true, Bonnie, and particularly, again, if Elizabeth Warren is elected, are you prepared to do that with her presidency?
Oh, absolutely. I think it's important to note that no matter how many good ideas somebody might have, that you can't just base it off of the top of the leadership, that you have to understand that the further that you go down, the more impact it has on your life. So local politicians, people in city council, in our state government, our state Senate, and our state house, and then we look at U.S. Congress and U.S. Senate, that they all play a role in how these policies will be implemented and will impact our lives. So we can't just elect a progressive president. We need to make sure that we're looking at electing progressive senators and progressive Congress, men and women, and progressive state house leaders, a progressive governor, and progressive city council members, and make sure that we study, what they've done and challenge them and call them out, even if we're in the same party as them. You got to make sure that, they know that this is what the people want. And you don't always have to go out into the street to do that. You can also write letters from your own home. If you don't feel comfortable being in the streets, you can write letters to them. You can make phone calls to them. There's other ways that you can be an activist and have your voice heard other than being in the street.
Absolutely. All those things count. And I got to be real truthful with you. I don't like being in the street. I don't like being yelled at. I don't like cars honking at me. But I also don't like my neighbor's kid down the street going off to war and getting blown apart either. I'm willing to go stand in the street if I can prevent that type of thing happening. And I love to hear that you're a Democrat and that you're a progressive, because I'll tell everybody this that will listen to me. Because of the bad news is America is what it is today. The good news is, because of the peculiar situation that we find ourselves in with this Donald Trump guy, the Democratic Party and progressives like us have the opportunity to change this country that we haven't had a chance to do since 1968, when Robert Kennedy was shot in that kitchen in Los Angeles. That pretty much put an end to that vision. But there's an opportunity for that if we can hit the ballot box and get these changes made. Bonnie, before I let you go here, I'm an old guy, a child of the 60s and 70s. There was a group called 10 Years After music. You're probably not even aware of these guys. And a singer-songwriter that headed this band called Alvin Lee. And he wrote a great song called I'd Love to Change the World, but I don't know what to do. So tell folks what they can do, because people say, well, I don't know where to go. I don't know how to organize. I don't know how to sign up. I don't know who to contact. What do you tell folks?
I would just say, I mean, if they're on social media, there's always events on social media that's listed happening in our community, especially right now. You know, we're in the midst of the Iowa caucuses, so there are so many different ways to get involved. Every campaign is looking for volunteers. The Democratic Party is looking, and there's always events. So, you know, you can sign up, go to events, ask the presidential candidates questions. That's one really good, you know, we're living in Iowa. It's like a really good way to connect, especially during, you know, this particular time, is to go out there and ask the candidates questions. We're very privileged living in Iowa that we have that opportunity to kind of be one-on-one with the candidates. So, and then I know like our U.S. Congress and U.S. senators always hold, you know, rallies around the state, you know, going to where they are. So, you know, these events are very publicized, and it's very easy to find them and to sign up and to just go and ask questions and share your concerns with our leaders. So
it's like being at a concert or something. If you go to see a band and you're surrounded by 20,000 people that love that band, I mean, it's all good. It's the way that it is at these rallies. It's great to be surrounded by like-minded souls and to share in that community. It's just a wonderful thing. I told everybody at the rally, I said, you know, it's great just to be around people that aren't nuts. I mean, everybody got a laugh out of it, but I mean, it's just a really rewarding, great feeling. It really is. And you might see Podcast by George covering some of these events, but I'll tell you what, there's a real good likelihood you're going to see Bonnie Brown out there walking the line and carrying a sign, because yeah, she walks it like she talks it. And I want to thank you and congratulate you and just say good on you, Bonnie. And thanks for being on a Podcast by George. We may come back and revisit with you here as we get closer to these congresses or caucuses and as more events are held and that type of thing, because I know you're an active activist. So thanks again.
Yes, thank you so much.
And we want to thank everybody for, you know, listening to Podcast by George. And if you're of a like mind, and I think you got to be if you're watching this podcast, share it. Send it out to the groups that you're involved in on social media. We're on Twitter also. You can share it around on there and get the word out to everybody and let everybody know about Podcast by George and, of course, Bonnie Brown. But for right now, we're going to hang it up. We're going to come back to you here very shortly. That's going to do it for this time. That's another Podcast by George.